Welcome to Growing Ecommerce. I'm your host, Mike Ryan of Smarter Ecommerce. Today, I'm joined by two guests, Kirk Williams, owner of ZATO Marketing, making his second appearance on the show, and Ben Kruger, who's a senior e-commerce growth consultant at Google. This was a jam-packed agenda. We went over the time box, and it ends with a bang. It's kind of funny. Sorry, though, if it feels a bit rushed there. But in exchange, you get a stimulating conversation about the grand brand, non-brand debate in Google Ads, the ways in which Performance Max is like and unlike paid social, and a discussion about whether or not CPCs matter anymore. This was a fun one. I hope you enjoy it. All right, cool. Today we've got Kirk Williams of ZATO Marketing and Ben Kruger of Google. So thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, pleasure is mine. So I'd love to give you both a minute for a quick intro. Maybe, Kirk, you've been on the show before. Ben, why don't we start with you?
So I am currently at Google. I've been here for 4 years. I work with a number of different high growth e-commerce brands, helping them maximize their investment with Google in a variety of ways. I come from a background of, I've only worked at startups, so this is by far the largest company I've ever worked at. I've got a mix of experience in attribution and retention. So now trying to round out the funnel with some acquisition. I'd say what mostly interests me is trying to help the performance advertisers I work with move up the funnel into things that are harder to measure, but better for the long term. And I also really enjoy trolling people on Twitter. And I think that's how we met. So it's great to be here.
Ben moves the conversation along.
Yeah, some spicy takes out there. Thanks for that background, Ben. I mean, how is that? Is there a bit of culture shock then moving into such a large environment, or does it feel small enough because of the way like the teams are structured, or what's that like?
In my first couple of years here felt like it was still the startup, but I think as I've progressed through the org, definitely hitting some walls in being able to move as quickly as I would like to. And it's a really big company. It's getting bigger, and I'm trying to bring perspective that I hear from all of you guys who are, the actual users of the product, back internally, because I think, I don't want to say we're in a bubble, but it's a bit of an echo chamber of like Google, but there's a lot more that matters to our customers. And so, yeah, I think it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces that I'm trying to be the voice of the customer and bring some new perspective internally and help us move a little quicker.
Yeah, well, really appreciate that. And I think that's an effect that can happen. That's not just Google by any means. In my company, sometimes we have to really stay on ourselves to really be talking with the voice of the customer and putting that customer voice on a pedestal, because otherwise it's just too easy for you just know what's in those four walls, call it a bubble or not. We all just know what's going on in our four walls mostly. So fair
Absolutely.
enough. And I think we appreciate those efforts. Kirk, why don't you say a word about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first I might note, like, Ben, I think you do that well from what I've seen. Obviously, like you'll get crap from people on Twitter and stuff, or sometimes rightfully so, right? Tossing some sort of this is the statement, and then people push back. It's like, okay, let's adjust it and that. But yeah, from what I've seen, like your willingness to listen and actually communicate that internally, which I think is a huge opportunity for Google. And in some ways, like it's actually really encouraging to see Googlers doing that, not just kind of sticking in, at least from our perspective, right? And that might be some with this call, right? It's kind of like kind of seeing things from those different perspectives. But at least from our perspective, there can be like a heavy engineering focus from Google. And like I've just seen like you have this desire to do Google Ads well and to really push on PPCers to like with your GA4 tweet recently, like let's just stop being lazy and digging in, Yeah. There might be some level where us PPCers need to hear some level of that, but also, being able to take our feedback and go back to Google is really helpful. So, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for engaging.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, PPC Kirk all over the socials. So we have a real small agency. We primarily focus on search ads, search shopping, all that. We like to say anything Google and Microsoft related, everything else, I don't touch. That keeps us kind of in the zone of what we know and allows us to like go as deeply as we want to. And then also like kind of a core aspect of our agency would be just wanting to manage our accounts well at a deep level, and then also do that in a way where we're not sacrificing our own internal, employee mental health, at least at work, right? And so some of that just looks like really us trying to make sure that we're finding right partners and limiting accounts that our agents, our employees, that my employees have, and just trying to be like the agency. Like I want to be the agency where when like the people that I work with look around and they hear the agency culture horror stories, and I like want them to not be able to relate to those at all. And that's kind of what I've been striving for. So
Thank you both for those introductions, and I think we got a pretty full agenda. So let's just jump right into it. I want to start off talking about brand because these conversations have been bubbling up to a certain extent between the three of us and many others out there. Also for a longer time, like I think this topic of brand versus generic traffic, for example, and things that come up like brand protection campaigns. There's many layers here, and they've been around forever. They've been around as long as Google Ads have been around and longer, I'm sure. But I think with Performance Max, this topic started getting agitated again and was coming up to the surface again more. So, like a few sub points here: splitting brand versus generic traffic. Why does that matter? Why does it not matter? I don't know, Kirk. Do you want to get started on that one?
yes, I have many thoughts. So as I want to do, I'll just ramble a little bit and then I'll shut up at some point. So I mean to me, so real big picture, right? So the reason why people oftentimes think of brand differently is because brand suggests some sort of previous funnel interaction, right? Like someone can't know about your brand unless like they've already been marketed to, they've seen something, like they saw you on Shark Tank, like there was some sort of traffic beginning influence that then they see that enough to be able to search for your brand, right? And so at some level, so at some point you get into all of the tactical, like what should we do with brand keywords, things like that. I think initially it's helpful just to start with like, there is a difference between those simply because that tends to be a warm audience where you've already invested money into them previously in the funnel, right? And so that's often where, you'll hear people talk about things like blended ROAS and that. And oftentimes that just means, return on ad spend throughout your entire account as it includes all of the different places in your traffic funnel. And so I think with brand, that's one of the ways that we look at it would be seeing that at a philosophical level as like, that's already been marketed to. And so oftentimes that'll influence how we're setting bids and like how we're identifying value of those. We're probably going to have, more aggressive ROAS targets and other sort of things because like we're aware of the fact that we've already spent money on them down the funnel. And so the more that starts getting mushed together in an account, the more that it's difficult for us to assign proper, let's say blended ROAS, like, let's say a campaign type like PMax, where you're not actually aware of how much brand is in there, right? And so that can make it difficult even to assign a proper blended ROAS, just because like you're not quite aware of the mix. And so I think that's often why marketers, again, even for right or wrong, like to segment those out and try to get some insight into controlling some sort of like efficiency metrics there. So I don't know if that gets us at least started. So
can you help me understand from purely like a financial perspective, why it matters? Like if you're thinking of like a marketing efficiency ratio, like all you really care about is, you could think of it as just, that's like a blended ROAS, right? So like you're investing in the funnel, to your point, like you've already paid to warm those people up. I don't know why you wouldn't want to miss the easy part of it, which is converting them after they've looked for your brand. And if we're thinking of like strictly just numbers, like you'd want to max out your brand and then get what you can from non-brand and make sure it's hitting the ratio that you want. So is it more of just like, I want to see these splits and better control it? Because to me, when I'm thinking like, if I'm really just trying to maximize all of my investments, like maximize it, like get all of my brand search and then whatever's left over, that pick it up in non-brand as well. Like, is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike, obviously feel free to hop in at any time if you have thoughts too. Like, I think there's some level where I would totally agree with that. Right. So and that at some point might get us into the conversation about, you'll have arguments oftentimes on Twitter of like, should you even, bid on brand, things like that. I think there are so many aspects of a brand that changes that, first of all, like that conversation often annoys me simply because like you might have a SaaS, B2B SaaS company with incredibly aggressive, like a long sales funnel, incredibly aggressive competitions, whatever, where someone can literally type in, their company mint money or whatever. And there is not the bottom funnel intent that oftentimes can be around a lot of, let's say, just like lower value D2C type products, where if someone types in that brand, they're much more likely to, so in some ways, even that conversation, there's so many aspects of that are important to discuss, where at some level, like bidding on brand to me, I'd say like what you said, bidding on brand for sure is, I think, kind of overall this essential thing at this point. But to me, it's in trying to make it first as efficient as possible. But also, and I think here's where, like, as you get, I'm trying to kind of answer your question about MER and that, because I think there's a concern with not losing track of what is happening at the upper funnel side of things as well, and being able to have a proper mix involved with that. And so I think that's where having insight into, here's where our brand is over here, here's the efficiency we know we can max that out at, and then being able to segment even like different creative, different audiences, different creative, that sort of thing, like pushing them over into something else. We've typically in the past seen more success with like understanding that those two groups, let's just call them groups of people, tend to perform differently, tend to need different assets, all that stuff. So we can tend to be more efficient than just kind of shoving them all together and trying to keep an eye on some removed goal like MER. So
gotcha.
Apologies if that doesn't totally answer your question, but just some additional thoughts on that.
No, it does with the creatives and the messaging and. Ahead,
I mean, definitely. I think to this point that of MER being a bit removed somehow. I mean, it's not really. It's a directional metric. It's not really a tactical metric, and ultimately, there are just so many levers that you have right now in Google Ads, and your budget is one of them. Your return on ad spend target is going to be one of them, and I think it is important to have transparency. In terms of your revenue split, your traffic split there, you might want to budget differently there. It's a sensitive topic. It matters to people time and again. This topic is, it's ultimately something where people do want to differentiate those traffic sources. And at the MER level, sure, I don't want to leave that revenue on the table. And if it's supporting at this very high level, efficiency level, that's totally clear. I wouldn't second guess that. But when you get down to the campaign level, people typically want that split up.
The brand bidding thing too, like it always drives me nuts when at some point they point to things like the eBay case study that was out a few years ago, things like that. And that drives me nuts because I'm like, you're pointing to one of the most recognizable brands in the world, where like there really is an intent. Like totally agree. If you want to hit ebay.com and there's not an ad for ebay.com, you're probably eventually going to find your way to ebay.com. You know what I mean? And so like that sort of the case study really does drive me nuts because like we'll have real small, they basically have no brand presence. They've not really done much at the top of funnel, things like that. like a D2C'er who's kind of like, whoa, well, what about this? They did a study that, brand bidding did lead to eBay.com. And it's like, once you've spent billions of dollars building your brand to that, let's have that conversation.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what I was saying before in terms of even just like, there are so many situations that are different. And so if someone is analyzing that, which is fair to ask that question for their account and try to figure that out well. But like, I really think it needs to start with them understanding that there's a lot of differences, even between businesses and verticals and all that stuff as part of that conversation. It's not just, somebody on Twitter said they tried something and like, yeah, let's all shut off our brand because, Joe tried that, so it's complicated, which people don't like to hear that.
It gets a lot of likes on Twitter though, if you say something about it.
Undoubtedly. And it, one thing that bugs me a little bit, people finding workarounds for excluding brand from PMax and stuff like that. I think it's so funny that there were a lot of these best practices emerging in the middle of this really intense high growth adoption phase of PMax, as it was really as smart shopping was migrating over, and we just saw all this budget pouring into PMax, and suddenly everyone on Twitter or LinkedIn is a guru about PMax, and I just feel like it was way too early to talk about best practices. Kirk, you published a blog post to that effect, and yeah, sure, we can have ideas and hypotheses, but there was a little bit of guruism going on there, and but now it's slightly a moot point. I mean, Ben, help us understand if you can speak to this. Like, Google in the end did decide to offer campaign level brand negatives for PMax, and I mean, is that just purely advertiser pressure, or how do you see
think so? I do think it's advertiser pressure. I think you might have been the one to point out, one of you, excuse me if I don't remember it, but I know it's one of you, pointed out that it's like not actually terms, right? It's like brand category exclusion. Yeah. So I guess that's a happy medium, perhaps. I do think it's advertiser pushback. I can't think of any other. Oh, it's like brand. I think it's brand safety. It's because it's running on inventory outside of search. I believe some advertisers were probably concerned about their brand appearing on inventory or placements that they may not want. So this helps you limit and control that exposure. Yeah. I think that is the primary reason.
I mean, maybe to unpack that a bit, there's new feature for PMax. They're not actually negative keywords as we know them in the traditional sense. They're called brand lists, and the feature isn't rolled out yet, so I can't speak to it in too much detail. But my understanding is that Google automatically detects brand terms that you might want to exclude. You're able to do that then, and that will cover search and shopping. But then, in terms of brand safety on other kinds of placements, you then, like YouTube, for example, there's a different place you need to go to handle that. That's my understanding right now.
And I think we are rolling out the ability to have placement exclusions. There are account level placement exclusions, which are typically only available if you were running display and video. But now I think you can do it at the account level, even if you're not running display and video. So that will help with PMax as well.
The brand safety thing, out of curiosity, like, what does that look like practically? If you know, I mean, are they analyzing like the site and determining what the brand is, or are we going to put in specific, here's what we see as brand that we want to exclude?
I haven't seen it, to be honest. I just think, I think Mike, you brought this up as well somewhere, like it's moving into this like keyword, and this is all me. Google has not told me any of this stuff. This keyword list sort of future, right? So like these things become very difficult in that environment as we're running on other inventory and other placements. It's like a brand level, like a brand term negative is not going to cover everything that you're looking for because it's running in more than just search terms. And if Bard or ChatGPT and all of these conversational things start to pick up, like we're moving away from this like explicit search term world that we know. So I think how we think about brand, both in controlling traffic splits, measuring, controlling placements, like it all needs to evolve to account for the way that the world is going. So I think it's super interesting. I think we all just need to change the way that we have been doing things, measuring and optimizing. It's all changing. And my biggest thing is just like, I feel like we waste so much time fighting it. Like, look, PMax rolled out in an economic downturn, and I had a bunch of advertisers say like, PMax ruined my business. Like, no one's buying home goods anymore. No one's buying furniture right now. Like, they bought their houses. No one's moving. The category is declining. Like, maybe it's that, but PMax happened to roll out at the same time. And like, it's easy to point the finger at the product that changed, but like the world is changing, both in the economy, the digital atmosphere. There's like so much at once. And I think so much of our conversations are trying to do things the way that we always have, but it's a new world. Every platform is rolling one of these things out. It's got to be for a reason. And I think the conversation should progress and like how to maximize it personally.
What about brands like in that scenario that would be more like generic sounding, where it would be a lot more difficult to identify, this is the brand. And sometimes that's like, right. That's sometimes how it works is you have kind of those outlier accounts and situations where those sort of changes and more automated solutions kind of leave them in the dust. And I think sometimes that's the tricky part is you do have a core group that XYZ works really well for. And then you'll have kind of these outliers where it's just kind of like, yeah, sorry, like that's not going to work for you. And I think that's sometimes where some of that frustration comes, especially from businesses that fall into that.
I just personally, I don't think you have a brand if you have like super generic term as your website name. Like maybe that's like a hot take, but like not that many people are looking for your brand. Like a lot of the smaller businesses I work with, there's not that many people looking for your brand to begin with. So like, we're just, I don't want to say wasting time, but like it's hard to like slice and dice this stuff, especially when it's a generic term like that, to your point, like just capture the demand that's profitable for you.
I wonder if in the future AI could get stronger here, because I know like that's a challenging use case now from today's standpoint. But the funny thing is that a human can differentiate and recognize that something's brand and not generic through different kinds of context and this kind of multimodal thing. Like when we see a word plus then an image or a brand color or things, we're able to kind of connect the dots. And as we get into multimodal AI and stuff like that, I'm just speculating here, but maybe this kind of a challenge will get solved.
We see that. Yeah, we see that behavior, especially in more like I'm thinking like boring e-commerce industries, like parts, where you'll have exactly what you said. You'll have a very generic, like not really brand term. And like, it annoys the crap out of us, right? This business has been around for a decade, and they back in the day with like the SEO stuff, they're like, what we should do? We should name our business like these 4 specific terms that is like core, so we can rank for them, right? And like they never change their business statement. And so to your point, you're like, on one hand, you're right, that's not really a brand. On the other hand, we do see that engagement, especially in like conversion rates and things like that, communicate exactly what Mike was saying. At certain times, there is brand intent. And I think that's just why it gets somewhat tricky. And I think my point just being more of that broader point that we were talking about is that seems to be like a broader frustration, I would say, between advertisers and Google, where there's like, let's just say, this is totally made up numbers. Let's just say like 80% of accounts and advertisers and things like that work a certain way. And so like engineers will crunch numbers, blah, blah, and they might build a product as well as with Google goals and objectives and whatever else is going on in the roadmap that we don't know about, right? Along with those 80%. And then let's just call it the 20% of other accounts are kind of left in the dust. And I have to wonder, as part of the ecosystem, if there can't be some way of both and, which currently in this system, like what we have right now, arguably kind of is what I'm describing. You really do have like let's say someone just is like, Ben, I hate PMax. I'm thinking of like some of the Taylor Holiday conversations, stuff like that. Okay, that's fair. You can use search and shopping. I think the question that none of us are surprised by is, like in a few years, that's not going to probably be the option. So it is going to move to a place where those outliers are kind of left in the dust. I guess I have concerns with that as a big business model.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know where it's going, but I try to hop on board and just ride the wave.
Yeah, I think we can talk about like the market power that Google has in a situation like this, or however. But to Ben's point, that I think he made a statement like this earlier. Other ad platforms all going in the same direction as well. We see Advantage Plus campaigns on Meta, TikTok already rolling out smart performance campaigns, and every new ad platform that comes out is gonna try to go in this direction from day one or as soon as they feasibly can. And Google, in Google's defense, they've done the really hard work of pioneering this for years, developing the technology, bringing it through its awkward age where it wasn't working that well, changing hearts and minds, convincing people to try this at all, let alone test it, let alone trust it. And then something like Advantage Plus or Smart Performance campaigns, they end up riding the tailwinds on that to a certain extent. But this is the way the technology is available, and you can't put it back in the box anymore. And but
loaded question though. Why does everyone love Advantage Plus but hates PMax?
Hey, you know what? One thing about Advantage Plus, I think with Advantage Plus, for example, you can see and control your blend of acquisition and remarketing. And that's something that we're touching on here with this brand non-brand topic. And it's generally you can't control that balance in PMax. So that's one thing right there.
So
I didn't know that. Makes sense.
Like, to me, this actually gets into kind of the bigger conversation, right? Especially, as PMax is sometimes compared to Facebook and other social things. I think like there's two massive differences. So I don't know Advantage Plus. Like I don't run it at all. This is just kind of what I'm aware of in the ecosystem, right? So like, I'll just maybe state it, and then people can argue online after hearing this. But like, Facebook audiences are arguably just always have been better than Google. So that's a huge part of it. Is like Facebook just has like incredible audience data, and so like it stands to reason that their machine learning, from an audience first perspective, campaign type perspective, is just going to be better. And again, like, it's fair to disagree with that, and everyone can. And I know that Google's working actively to try to move into that, but that to me is one of those things, especially in the transition phase of like shifting more to an audience first campaign type, is like, y'all need to get the audiences better, in some ways, because then like there will be more trust machines. So that's one huge difference. Again, not having run Advantage Plus, but like the other one to me is the difference is simply in the platforms in terms of like placements as well. So from a social perspective, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all that, like the placement is, for the most part, primarily like the user feed, right? So like, even if a person visits TikTok, and even if their intent is not necessarily, hey, I'm going to TikTok to purchase something, there for the most part is at least a consistent intent. Like it kind of removes that variable as well from everything. And part of the thing with PMax, and this is fair, like, is that you are hitting everything from search results with incredibly high intent. That's what we've always loved search, right? You're hitting that to like some, you could be hitting some random, like aggressively political, GDN thing. You could be hitting, YouTube, right? All that stuff where there's just a ton of variable just in terms of like why even the user is visiting a placement. And I think that changes things as well. So if like, there's probably more to be figured out in that, and it'd be interesting to talk. But in terms of like, why is Facebook Advantage Plus different than PMax? I think those two things are like a really big part of that difference. So,
very good points. Yeah, I hadn't thought about the placements are super consistent on those platforms. The audiences, I feel like we could talk further about that. It's a really good perspective. I'm obviously biased, but I just think it's like we have people looking for products, and we're modeling off of those signals. So like the intents, like, yeah, I think they're both really two obviously really good ways of segmenting and targeting people. I think with this like GDN and extra placements, my view, and it's not my dollars and my budget and whatnot, it's just like it's trying to build a funnel, because as performance marketers, it's so hard to invest in the upper funnel. So it's trying to do that in the best and drive the best results for your business in doing so. And like, it's uncomfortable. You can't see that it's happening. And like, I think that's the true aim of PMax, is to do acquisition, but also invest a little bit and reach new audiences if the budget and the targets allow, and do it using machine learning better than a human can. And like, I think that's the goal. But to your point, it's going to be on different inventories and placements, and not solely focus on search. And I think that's the big change.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think like there's so much opportunity with PMax for like further segmentation along more of these like generalized audience parameters, especially like, let's just say at a very, very high level, cold upper funnel, however we want to say it, and like warm bottom funnel, right? The ability to more distinctly segment that out, I think, more than just simply what's possible with like the new customer stuff. I think that even to being able to like adjust, like change assets, things like that, I feel like there's opportunity there in building trust with advertisers. I'm done.
Yep.
Yeah. And just one other note on like the market reception that you're asking about there, Ben. You were saying it yourself earlier that PMax had kind of unlucky timing rolling out into an economic downturn. Mm-hmm. And now the same is true of Advantage Plus, but I think there was a difference in sort of the framing or the perception there, because meta campaigns had already been brought low by this whole tracking,
sure.
And they were actually on a bit of a rebound. And despite the negative macro things that were going on overall, like as a platform, it was on a bit of a rebound. It was seeing some positive momentum, and I think it fed into that. Whereas, they're just coming from two different bases, in other words, and I think that was a factor as well.
100%. It's a really good point.
I'm glad that we got into this topic, because it's something I had on the agenda, like PMax as a meta alternative. Menachem Ani, really bright guy. He talks about asset only campaigns for PMax, and he calls that like a paid social style PMax. So we touched on this a bit. Like Kirk, you're talking about how the placements in a real paid social campaign, they're in this kind of a social feed, and an asset only campaign in PMax is not really quite like that. It's going to be these other different kind of placements out there. But I'm just wondering, like, maybe I'll put this one to you, Ben. What do you think about these different kind of hacks, let's call them, like the feed only campaigns, the asset only campaigns, compared to PMax as intended? Let it be full funnel. Let the machine figure this stuff out.
I don't know if these hacks work or not. I don't know. But because I think the way that I understand it is, I think PMax is always going to go after search first as like a DSA. And I think that's good it's good for all advertisers. I think it's good for people who have a huge, like a really well built out search structure, and it could pick up the incremental demand that is not captured in search. And it's also good for people that have no search campaigns at all, because it's going to go into search for them. So I think regardless if you put a feed, assets, I think it's going to go to search first. And the only way to control that is by continuously building out your search structure. And then it's going to go, I would assume, shopping next, if there's a feed attached. If there's not a feed, then it matters. Like, so like it's going to try to allocate as much budget as it probably will try to allocate as much budget as it can towards search. So if you give it enough room and enough room on your ROAS or CPA, then it would start to dabble into the other placements. But to me, like, I don't know if this is true or not, but to me, I think there's like a order of operations and like trying to get the most efficient sales as it can, and then move to the next level whenever it maxes that out. And if it's maxed out search, then it's going to start to blend some of these other placements to move people through the funnel. So I don't know if the hacks work or not. Like, I get the theories, I've read them. You guys are like probably more hands-on with it than I am. Like, can you even report? I guess you could use that script to like see if it's doing anything, but like, I think a lot of this, sorry, just lastly, like a lot of it is just becoming creative. Like all of these platforms are all now creative driven, and like, I think that's where you should be spending your time on creative and assets. So like the asset only hack works, but it's still going to go to search. I don't think you can really stop that unless you have a phenomenally built search program, which you guys probably do.
Yep. Yeah, we talked internally about that, and that's the same thing, Ben. Like, that's part of what we came up with was it's still serving on search. So in some ways, like, it's very different than a social campaign. But I kind of understand what Menachem is saying, and like in terms of, it's like a creative plus audience first driven campaign, rather than So I like that makes sense, but it is still driven on search. It is serving on search, and then like we talked about before, like you still have a lot of a variety of placements and stuff, which is very different than social. So I kind of get the idea of calling it a paid social style, but like my emphasis would be more on the style rather than the social, I guess.
Sure.
I think it's definitely more audience first, because like PMax is, the central logic is supposed to be around assets and themes and these as being important for audiences, basically. And so it's much more audience centric than campaigns of the past. That's kind of the premise. And with e-commerce campaigns, there's still this massive thing in the middle of that, which is the product. And, for the e-commerce campaigns, we definitely see it as, I would say, shopping first. Shopping being a subset of search, but definitely shopping inventory before textile inventory. It goes hard there from what we typically see.
Yep.
And then to me, there's this still kind of unresolved tension there, where it wants to be more of an audience campaign and an asset campaign, but at the end of the day, it's still behaving, or there's still so much of the product and the feed in there as there was in standard shopping and smart shopping. So, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I'm personally, I think there are use cases for these hacks. The feed, I actually kind of like the asset only somehow more than the feed only. Like the feed only is intended to kill the things that makes PMax, and then why bother? I don't fully get why you would bother to do that. Like, instead, just use standard shopping and smart bidding or something like that. But I don't know,
because I guess you lose the dynamic display remarketing.
Yeah, the dynamic remarketing. Yeah, exactly.
When we first started like trying PMax and advertising with it and testing it, I just like, I was actually pretty quiet online, because I kind of felt like, man, I must be missing something, because everyone's releasing all of these like, wow, you got to do this XYZ, and I was like, man, okay, we tried that and that didn't work, or whatever. And I think that's why I've started to become more vocal in terms of, I just don't think there are best practices aside from the real obvious, make sure your feed is optimized, make sure you have the correct daily budget set, things like that. Those are best practices. Other than that, we've just increasingly taken this, like, yeah, we'll try it. We'll test something out. We'll test this, like, new customers only campaign, that sort of thing. And like, sometimes we see it work great, sometimes we don't. And to me, then it's just a matter of like, okay, that didn't this time. Like, let's figure something else out and let's try resegmenting, and maybe we can try this product balance and this new PMax campaign. And sometimes that's increasingly, like, I feel like how we've taken PMax is, like sometimes for whatever reason, the certain mix of assets and audiences and products don't quite get it. And so, okay, how can we rethink about what if we take this group of products now and combine that with this asset, and now, run that off, and let's try this again with a new campaign. And I feel like that's been more successful than just having this, like, we always in every account set up this PMax campaign and set up an assets only and then blah, blah, blah. So I think that's why increasing, I'm just like, I just don't know if there are best practices with PMax. I just think there are some helpful things to know about this stuff, and then test,
I love it. It's way too soon to put a best practice on something that's been out for 6 months, like 7 months. You're so right.
Yeah. Can I ask a question to Ben on audiences? Like Ben, so PMax audiences, are there things that you just see are gaping holes in the way PPCers, like advertisers, are utilizing audiences in PMax? I don't know, just kind of an open-ended question. Like, are there things that you just see like, hey, people are not doing this, and this is actually a huge missed opportunity, and we should be thinking better about audiences in PMax, and how is that?
Yes. Great question. So I see a lot of our documentation leading towards this concept of signals and training the algorithm. And it's really evident in broad match. Broad match is using a variety of signals that no other match type is using. So if you've got an ad group of keywords, it's going to use all of the keywords in that ad group as a signal of what you're trying to drive towards. So if you've got, I don't know, there's a bunch of these like personal injury attorney PPCers like yelling at me on Twitter now, but like, because of things are matching to the wrong terms or whatever. But like, if you're doing single keyword ad groups, like we all used to do, you're not training the algorithm on what themes actually make sense. So you pool all these things together, and you really want to get to add like as few ad groups or campaigns as you need, and getting the most volume onto an ad group is actually really important. So in this ad group, it's going to use the similarities. Like, you can train the algorithm by using your keywords to say, these are the types of queries that I want to match to. On top of that, it's using content from your landing page as another signal into the theme of customers that you're trying to attract. And I think that's new. I don't think that's like, yes, DSA was using content to find new keywords, but it's using that as another signal, plus location, plus a variety of other things that, we know from like the user signals that we have. All of these things you're trying to tell the system, I need more of this. I need more of this. And so with PMax, I don't know how much uplift you get from optimizing the audiences that you're putting into the system, but that is another way for you to give the system a signal in the types of customers that you want. Like, I would have an asset group I'd go pretty granular. If I had like different categories, if I like running shoes versus t-shirts, I would put my highest value people who have bought running shoes, like someone who buys running shoes 3 times a year from me. That would be the audience that I put into there. And then do the same for t-shirts and get really granular on whatever you can tell the system, because that's what I think is going to set advertisers apart from one another. Everyone now has the same tools. It's like, how can you get the most data into the system to use to your advantage? So the creative that you're putting, the headlines, all of that stuff matters, and theme it based on what you're trying to sell and get pretty granular within those asset groups.
So in your brain, when you're like, you have a campaign, you think, okay, I need to start building these asset groups. Are you like, is the very highest priority thing that you're thinking of more of your product mix, or is it your audience signal for that asset group?
For me, for ecom, I would go product.
Oh, cool. Same. Okay.
Yeah. But then, so that's within one campaign. I then think, since everyone needs to generate profit now because we're like back to reality, I would start to theme campaigns by margins, right? So you've got your like high margin products, get one campaign with a low ROAS target, and start doing it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, and again, this is another signal, like everyone's passing revenue into the system. We should be passing margin into the system. And Mike, I know you've like written about this. Like, that is the ultimate signal. It's like, just tell the system what you want instead of like using things as a proxy. And it's just another signal. Like, how can you get your data in? And then how can you add LTV multipliers to your high value customers, and like start telling Google what you really, or any of these platforms, what you really want, as opposed to like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I'm sorry. We're in our last minutes. Unfortunately, it's flying by, but I'm also smiling because I know Kirk has written about this topic as well, and he's not such a fan of reflecting margin and structure. And actually, I started writing a conversation piece to that, but we could go down.
I'm still pondering that. Yeah.
Well, it's probably because people don't buy what they click on. That's the flaw in the structure. But it's better than just having it all in one and using like an average ROAS.
That's one, but also like lumping all of the different types, like it makes it difficult to start matching assets and stuff when you are bidding, let's say, according to so like I'm increasingly interested in the margin idea if you also have like additional filters, if that makes sense. Yeah, so maybe it's like, here's your like winter outerwear asset group plus maybe margin or something like that. So then you can still better match asset level. Anyways, you go ahead, Mike.
Yeah.
And when you don't have like a $20 project on $2,000 product in the same asset group, even though it's margin based. And so we've had that conversation.
We can have it again, but you can handle this by the campaign structure. I have a chart. It's in this article. I'll send it to you. We're running out of time. Do we dare raise the topic of cost per click, or is it smarter to move on to final words?
CPCs are dead, so we don't really have much to talk about there. I do want to have this conversation.
I mean, let's try to keep it quick, okay?
In 5 minutes. Yeah. The 5-minute conversation.
So Ben makes this analogy, right? That using like Max CPC, for example, is like it's like constraining Waze or Google Maps or whatever to only drive through school zones or something, when there would be the opportunity to drive on like the freeway or take a much faster route. And it's maybe not the perfect metaphor, but the idea is that like Max CPC is constraining the algorithm and the potential customers that you can reach. Is that a fair summary, Ben?
Yeah, I think that since we're in a world of telling the system I need this return on my ad spend, I think that CPC is irrelevant. If like again, it's not my business, it's easy for me to say, but like I'd be willing to drop $800 on a click if it's worth $3,200, right?
Yeah, it depends on the value per click. That's right. I want to produce some data here or something, but it seems like anecdotally that it's just too high risk for some advertisers. They're not comfortable with it. It gets to a point where they're just not willing to spend what Google's trying to spend on certain clicks. Kirk, do you have something to say about this topic?
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. This goes back even in this podcast, we were chatting, and at some point, you joked about, like personal injury lawyer advertisers, getting after you on Twitter about like, SCAGs and not tracking. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's somewhat relevant to this conversation because, so I see both sides. And that's not just me trying to be Kirk, like political, like pleasing everyone, although maybe a little bit, but, so it's funny because actually, like, I remember having conversations for years where we're trying to tell like our clients who are maybe upset that like, whoa, this CPC was $2.30 and now it's like $4.50. And like, why is that? And exactly what you're saying, Ben, like there's just some level of like trying to teach them like auction mechanics. Like if there's a higher value auction, that means more people are willing to pay higher for that. And again, that's said in a world where like all of that is perfectly aligned, let's say. Yeah, everyone is more interested in paying for someone, saying, I want to buy that exact specific Lego Star Wars set, like behind me. That's a higher value auction than just someone typing in toys in Google, right? And so like overall, typically CPCs tend to like reflect that, and that's totally fair. But then I think you get into like, to me, more of the, like you use the word like CPC is irrelevant, and I guess like for me, it's like it's lower in. Like it should be maybe lower in importance or value or that sort of thing. But I don't know if it's totally irrelevant because you do have like additional business constraints that work into that, right? So, like with the lawyer thing. So from an advertiser's perspective, they've had this Google account. They have, let's say for 5 years, they've been bidding on best personal injury lawyer in Denver, Colorado. And like that just consistently has been $250 a click. But like exactly like you said, that's worth $20,000 to the business. They know that. They have that worked in, right? All of a sudden, for them, like there's this stability there. There's this like financial sense that makes sense. And so all of a sudden then, Google comes in, they're like, hey guys, we're going to improve this, right? And they start tossing in all of these close variants that like don't reflect the same conversion rate, don't reflect the same whatever. And now like, and Google's like, well, no, we'll learn that over time. So in 6 months, you can expect, after spending another $250 a click for these learnings, blah, blah, blah. And at some point, the lawyer's like, no, like I'm not at that CPC level. Like I'm not able to shell out that amount of learnings, especially when that's matched up to a system that had been delivering consistent and acceptable results. And I think for me, that's part of the CPC thing. Like we've seen clear, like there's been enough jokes over the years on Twitter, right, of someone sharing a screenshot of like I've been involved in that, of like here's a $35 product. There's not an LTV question. There's not a whatever. And now all of a sudden Google is suggesting we bid, $70 or something instead of, the $1.70. And I think that's where, to me, like, so I totally am aligned with the concept of needing to appreciate the way the auction system works with like the valued things. And like, we need to have an allowance for our CPCs adjusting around that. Totally agree with that. I think the concern would be in instances where it doesn't make economic sense for that click. So yeah.
But it's to me, it's the ROAS that should matter. Like if you're used to $250 clicks and we bid $500 on a click, but it still gets you the same return. Mm-hmm. That's the mindset that I have.
But it will be less return for the same spend.
No, it should be the same return. It's all it should all be relative. It should still be a 4-to-1.
Well, and I think like what we've seen, someone just shared something about this. Actually, it might have been on LinkedIn about their brand CPCs where they ran a test where they were bidding manually as opposed to like position based or something like that. And they like kind of this demonstration of, they were able to drive like they were able to find more efficient results within that spend. So I think what I'm saying is like I'm not denying that there is the possibility of spending more than you need to and that having some sort of ROAS. But the question and some of what we've seen is, but if we can find a lower CPC, more sweet spot where we can actually drive additional traffic and conversions for a slightly lower CPC. So we're kind of finding that sweet spot of like, it's not the ultra high CPC value auctions, but it's also not the real junk ones. We're kind of aiming more for the middle. And sometimes we just see that the system just wants to just crush that, sometimes those overly high CPCs and drive the overall ad spend up, especially, which is a difficulty with like clients with budget constraints. So I think that's my thought.
I mean, let me just add one maybe final word on here because we're at our time box. I'm sorry, we'll have to end this one a bit abruptly, but I just see it like, yes, on a per auction, if you look at the return on ad spend on a per auction basis, it's a relationship between the value per click and the cost per click. And when you're dealing with a high cost per click, it becomes a high risk, high reward situation. Mm-hmm. And then Google just needs to be really sure, because the other thing in there in your ROAS, it's your order value, sure, and the conversion rate. So Google needs to be super confident in a high likelihood of conversion to justify that CPC. And I'm not sure that that's always happening because, of the screenshots that you see, and maybe they're just these outliers and edge cases, and naturally in a system this large, that's going to happen. But
no one puts the screenshots of the cheap CPCs because it is an average.
4 cents. Yeah, that's fair. Well, and that's part of, and like that's fair. And some of what I think you're saying, Mike, and this is part of probably what the Google system is doing, is it's kind of like calculating this like a more longer term, right? Like a longer term window, like over time, like 3 months, 6 months, something like that, that'll average. So some of what we've dealt with actual like client conversations is then you also have like, even then the constraints of like what a client actually has for cash in order to like build that learning up for that to average out, as I hate to say it, almost like as opposed to playing it more safe in like less value auctions. But again, where you're taking in their actual ability to pay for those, like in a shorter window, like you're helping them survive that month, rather than like, well, I know that you paid $70 and your daily budget was at $60. Eventually it'll average out. Where, you know, oftentimes I feel like that's part of the PPC's objective, is like finding the ability to be more efficient there in, let's just call it the mid auctions. I don't know, someone with more economic theory and finance sense, I'd be curious to hear their thoughts too. So that might be you, Ben. Anyways.
Yeah, let's end it. I mean, if you got time, Kirk, give us a plug, or where can we find you online?
Yeah, PPC Kirk on social media everywhere, and then ZATOmarketing.com.
All right, thanks so much for joining us, Kirk. Ben, where can we find you?
Ben-Kruger.com. I like to write a lot, so sign up for my newsletter, and I'll be in everyone's DMs and Twitter replies.
Awesome. Thanks again, both of you, for a really great conversation. And
likewise.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Growing Ecommerce. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it with coworkers, friends, or within your professional network. We really appreciate it. This podcast is produced by Smarter Ecommerce, also known as SMEC. To learn more, visit smarter-ecommerce.com.